So as we just heard, President Lee is expected to sit down for a talk with Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba before heading to Washington to meet with Donald Trump. For more on the bilateral relations between Seoul and Tokyo, we're joined by Professor Daniel Connolly, Associate Professor of International Relations at Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. Professor Connolly, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you for inviting me.
So it's unusual for a South Korean president to meet the Japanese leader before meeting the U.S. president, right? How would this reflect the Lee administration's approach toward Japan?
I think Lee's decision to meet Ishiba before Trump is quite important, especially because there were many questions surrounding President Lee's foreign policy agenda during his election campaign. Therefore, I think meeting Ishiba first has the potential to reassure policymakers in Washington that Lee is willing to continue the trilateral cooperation established by his predecessor.
I see. And what issues do you expect to be on the agenda when President Lee meets Prime Minister Ishiba in Tokyo?
They're definitely going to build on a lot of the themes raised in their first meeting in the G7. This idea of a mature and future-oriented partnership will really focus a lot on economic and cultural exchanges. I am a little dubious, though, that there's going to be meaningful security or North Korea-related agreements because South Korea and Japan have very divergent interests in this area. So I expect some vague statements, but maybe not any transformative policy initiatives.
And another important issue is historical issues like wartime forced labor and comfort women or wartime sexual slavery, as they remain as thorns in bilateral relations. President Lee previously said he's going to take a two-track policy, separating historical disputes from bilateral cooperation. What's your take on this, and how does this approach sort of differ from the previous administration's policy?
Yeah, definitely. I think Lee's two-track foreign policy towards Japan can be very similar to Yoon's strategy, but I think there's a very important difference. Yoon was willing to forget historical issues dealing with Japan, but he was very ideological in his dealing with China and the United States and North Korea. I believe President Lee is more pragmatic with everyone. So he is more willing to forget historical issues with Japan, but also perhaps with North Korea and China. So maybe this two-track policy of President Lee is part of a broader pragmatic approach to all of the neighbors, not just Japan.
Right, and tomorrow marks the 80th anniversary of Korea's liberation from Japan's colonial rule. In your view, what's the key to improving relations between Seoul and Tokyo?
I think right now the biggest challenge is the global leadership vacuum. I think everyone can acknowledge that maybe the biggest economic threat to Japan and Korea is U.S. leadership under President Trump. And I think South Korea and Japan are both export economies. They have a strong congruence of interests when it comes to protecting the international trading order. So I think if they are really focused on a future-oriented partnership, more cooperation between South Korea and Japan in preserving the international trading order might be the best way to productively move their relationship forward.
I see. And before I let you go, will the trilateral cooperation with the United States also be on the agenda when President Lee and Ishiba meet next week?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, this is very important for President Lee to demonstrate to the United States that he's willing to build on this trilateral cooperation established by Yoon. But hopefully, in many ways, he's going to do it in his own unique way, not merely following in the footsteps of his predecessor.
I see. All right, Professor Connolly, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.